We have time for questions now from the public. So. Possiamo farle in italiano, poi verranno tradotte. Come preferite?
Come vuoi. Allora, la mia domanda verte sulla scuola dell'ARP. Mia figlia partecipa a una scuola molto particolare che in Italia si chiama scuola libertaria, e molte delle descrizioni combaciano con la scuola che hai appena descritto.
Sorry, his daughter in Italy goes to a school which takes on some similar theories.
Yeah,
what you were doing.
My daughter attends a democratic school that I think you know because of Summerhill, maybe. Have you heard of it?
What?
Summerhill. It's a very Summerhill. Yeah, it's a very popular school that the principals are pretty similar. I mean, it's not role-playing game, but there's a lot of choice the children have to make in order to attend this kind of school. I was wondering, how do you cope with the parents? Because we are struggling to convey the right messages and the right ideas about how the school goes, if the children will be raised well and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is there any? Yes, that sounded this one. Actually, we have a great advantage compared to primary schools, because our students are 14 to 17 years old. That means that they are at least 13 years old when they have to fight their parents to be allowed to enter. And a few of them have to fight. So that's one part. The students are active in showing that this is important for them. Many parents accept it simply because interest is seen as a very important way for learning in Denmark. But it's not really a deep or good pedagogical argument. It's just an easy way to agree. Yes, so you go there because you find it interesting. Let's hope it works. But when you talk about learning, that's actually where everything starts. We hope it works. But when we talk to parents, we talk strictly about our theory and about how much has been shown already for it to work. Nothing else, not the actual test scores or anything, but we do this with your child, we do it because of this, and we expect this result. Because if they don't buy it and they don't support their child, it may be a lost cause. So we don't win every time, but we win quite often.
Non monopolizzo, faccio veloce. First of all, Matthew, I want to ask you why Russia is stronger. Sorry. No, I was kidding. Well, that was not the question. I want to ask you about how do you I mean, you said that you have designed a game on the far end of one spectrum, you know, like a kind of cartoonish way of representing the
Cold War.
The Cold War, yeah, exactly. And but then you talked about religion and sex. How will you manage to schematize religion in this way without being politically incorrect on many levels?
Well, so it's a good question, because Americans don't really take politics too terribly seriously, and if you're watching our current election, you know how true that is.
No one's taking it seriously now.
Fair enough. The voters least of all. But we do take religion very seriously, so it's a little more dangerous a topic in the United States. I have a sense from my European friends that you can be a little more cynical about religion in Europe than you can in the United States to an extent. But the game that I'm designing right now, actually I'll be demonstrating over the weekend, is it was a German company asked us to do it. It's in commemoration of the 500th anniversary of Luther's 95 Theses. Next year will be the 500th anniversary. So I think the main thing is to take in this context, take the argument between the Catholics and the Lutherans seriously. And it's a serious argument. I mean, it's strange to me that the West spent 200 years trying to figure it out and killing each other trying to figure it out. But the fundamental argument is about how you get into heaven. And Luther was convinced that it was by faith and faith alone, and the Catholics thought it was through faith and works. And when you take those two arguments, everything else diverts from there, right? So indulgences don't work because indulgences aren't faith. That's another work, so you have to get rid of them, et cetera, et cetera. So we're taking the argument seriously, and we're taking the points of doctrine somewhat seriously, and hopefully we won't offend anybody too much going down that route.
Well,
And yet,
really.
and yet people are still debating it. Yeah, exactly. Right. But I was raised Catholic, so this time we win.
Well, maybe you can offend everybody the same amount at least. Yeah.
Right.
A question to Mr. Matthews. You talked about cards and using cards in a game to add uncertainty, to add playability, I would say, and all that. Okay, but a game is, of course, a simulation of politics, of war, conflicts, whatever. There's a point beyond which this uncertainty can become randomness or even pure chance. So, what's your way of designing a game using cards without going beyond this point? What's the extent you go to without thinking you're going too much into chance and you're staying into a historical reconstruction or something like that?
That's a fair question. So it's kind of a question of how much appetite any particular game has for randomness, right? And how closely the audience for the game will expect you to adhere to history. When we were designing Twilight Struggle, that was for an American war game company, and so the expectation was high that you would have some fidelity to the possible outcomes of the Cold War. But I take from Chris Crawford. He was an American computer game designer. He designed a game called Balance of Power, and when I was young, it was very popular. He wrote an extremely interesting book about designing that game. So if you can read English and you're interested in those kind of old 1980s games, I strongly recommend it. But one of the things that he talked about was how it's a mistake to worry as a game designer about simulation as opposed to a game. And when the distinction that he draws is that a simulation is something that should have a result that is replicable. In other words, and predictive. So in other words, if I play Twilight Struggle, after I'm finished with the game, that's how the Cold War should have ended. Like that, if it's a simulation, it should predict how the Cold War ends. He says, don't worry about that nonsense. And the example he uses is a flight simulator. He said, if I want to design a flight simulator as a game designer, I could worry about making sure when a plane goes into a dive, the dive rate is exactly right, so that if I ever get in a plane and it goes into a dive, the dive rate is exactly right. That'll be a simulation. It won't be very fun. The thing that I need to worry about is that sound of whirl in the background and the wind going through. That is what a gamer wants to hear, because when he goes into a dive, he wants that experience. So I approach game design that same way. I try and fill my games with historical detail, little Easter eggs, we might call them, or flavor, so that you get the feel of the period or the subject that you're involved in. And I worry less about making sure that the card that happened in 1949 gets played on turn 2, because if not, it's out of sequence. I don't worry about that so much. I feel like if I get the detail in and I give you that sense of the sound of the plane diving, that'll be good enough for most players.
I have a quick question for Malik, one more complex for Jason, so I start with Malik. Do you also use game design as teaching tools in your school, or not?
Yes. We think that there are a lot of things to learn from designing games. It's not that the students make brilliant games when they design, but they make a kind of decisions. Those are some of the few weeks where you're not actually part of playing yourself, apart from the short time when you finally play the game, and it's usually before parents' night, so you can play it with your parents as well. But that whole process of deciding we want this action, we want these measures, and because they are on a school where you play games all the time, they know a lot of the different measures they can bring in. And it's funny to see that you think you've seen it all after some time, and there's always someone who makes up something that you've never seen before. It's not always something that works, but it's always interesting to see how they do that.
Thank you. And Jason, Twilight Struggle is a really well-balanced, asymmetrical game. And I'm not so sure that the history was really so balanced. So my question is, which kind of compromise to the history have you done designing the games? And the second question is, if someone of the localization of Twilight Struggle in the different countries ask you to make changes to the game because they don't like the history that the games was talking about.
Well, to take your second question first, I did get some complaints from Portugal that they were linked with Spain. They didn't like that at all. And I have, and the other card that we get complaints about, and I guess this one is a little bit fair, is Willy Brandt from the Germans don't like the characterization that Ostpolitik is a pro-Soviet event as opposed to a, pro-Western. But that kind of speaks to the, first of all, the cartoonish nature of the game, and also to the idea that the only conflict that matters in the game is between the Soviet Union and the United States. So from an American perspective, a German chancellor who is making positive overtures to the Russians it's a bad thing. Stay in line is kind of how we viewed it. And your first question was about what kind of compromises am I willing to make for basically game balance, I think, compromises to history for game balance. In the context of Twilight Struggle, I don't know that the Europeans necessarily felt this way about the Cold War, but it is definitely true that there was a theme in American politics and American discourse that about every 10 years we were convinced that we were losing. Whether it was 1950, 1960, 1970, we would come upon this moment, whether it was Sputnik or the Vietnam War or whatever, and we would suddenly be like, oh my God, we're losing the Cold War. So even though I think in hindsight it seems obvious that, well, it seems obvious that the West was going to prevail, I don't know that in the actual time of living it, it was quite so obvious. And to a certain extent, I think the game also takes the right historical arc, which is to say that the Soviets are stronger at the beginning than they are at the end, right? So that was kind of our solution to that dilemma. In Campaign Manager was much harder because we already knew that by the time the game was published that Obama was going to shellac John McCain, which is what he did. So there we took a lot of compromises. Basically, we included some states that were, like for instance, New Jersey, that were not really in contention between the Democrats and Republicans, but we included them for play balance. And at the end of the day, the game has got to be fun for both players, right? So if you've got to throw something out the window in order to make it fun, I'm always for making it more fun.
Thank you.
Riassumo molto rapidamente per chi non avesse seguito tutto. Riguardo al bilanciamento politico all'interno del gioco sulla guerra fredda, Twilight, è chiaro che ci sono state anche lamentele da certi paesi, soprattutto dal Portogallo, sul fatto di essere messi insieme alla Spagna. In modo più generale c'è da fare un bilanciamento politico tenendo conto del fatto che il gioco deve essere comunque divertente per entrambe le parti, non è che può solo vincere a priori una persona. Quindi vivendo in America durante la guerra fredda c'era anche ogni 10 anni c'era la paura diffusa che l'America stesse perdendo la guerra fredda, quindi per quello che può sembrare scontato l'esito della guerra fredda adesso, vivendo la guerra durante quegli anni non era così scontato, e quindi diciamo che il gioco segue l'arco dei russi più forti all'inizio e meno forti alla fine, come in generale, però poi si differenzia di più all'interno della giocata. No, I didn't either. I was told. Yeah.
Well, one question for Mr. Malik, one question for Jason. At first, Mr. Malik. Well, I'm a sort of traditional teacher, so I would define your school as sort of utopian school. You have highlighted all the pros. What about the cons of your school?
Io sono un insegnante più tradizionalista. Lei ha illustrato tutti i punti positivi della vostra scuola. Ci può dire quale può essere qualche punto negativo?
Yes. The cons, I think the cons that I first would think of are the practical ones. We have not found a way where we could use this as a method all the time. You can use it for a year, and for students who really need it for 3 years, but you cannot use it for 10 or 11 years. You can include rote learning and training in some activities. It fits well with 15, 16 years old. It would probably be difficult to do for 9, 10 years olds in the amount that they need to cover those specific things. But you would be able to, that con is that you can't just make schools like that all the time. You would be able to use the method from time to time in those schools. That's what the University of Aalborg found out in their tests. However, what's hard then is that you have to learn how to learn in this way. This is not so odd because we always learn how to learn. A traditional school is one way that you have learned, but it's rather easy to learn because your parents get the idea from the beginning. LARP learning, your parents don't get the idea. You have to get it from the bottom. If you played LARP, you know how. If you didn't, you've got to learn first. That is definitely a problem for actually implementing the method. Would you like to?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Well,
Quindi
now,
posso? due problemi che ci sono con la scuola. Prima di tutto non è un metodo che si riesce ad applicare nell'arco di un lunghissimo periodo. La maggior parte dei nostri ragazzi rimangono 1 anno, 2 anni, chi ne ha veramente bisogno anche 3 anni, però non è una scuola applicabile a tutte le età, soprattutto magari ragazzi di 9-10 anni farebbero fatica a mantenere il passo su questo tipo di approccio. L'altro è che bisogna imparare ad imparare in questo modo, nel senso per un ragazzo con una famiglia, con genitori che hanno frequentato un certo sistema scolastico, si gioca in casa, cioè i genitori capiscono già qual è il meccanismo scolastico tradizionale. Quando invece si tratta di una novità di questo tipo, è già difficile per i genitori capire in che modo i loro figli potranno imparare in questo modo, quindi c'è anche questo scoglio spesso da superare.
And there is one other challenge, and that is that you often have to draw out of the teaching for the student what it is they have learned if they have to reproduce it in a more conservative way, like an exam. So it's not that they don't learn it, but if they have to reproduce it, you have to draw it out and explain, so you need coaching.
Un altro discorso è quello del fatto di non formalizzare l'apprendimento che fanno molti ragazzi, nel senso, se loro devono riportare quello che hanno imparato, per quanto l'abbiano imparato, in un contesto più tradizionale, possono far fatica, quindi dobbiamo anche prendere il tempo delle volte per questo atto di formalizzazione.
Well, thank you. And another question for Mr. Jason. Well, and you have defined your Twilight Struggle a good didactic aim, but do you know any attempt in some American school where they have tried to use Twilight Struggle as a sort of didactic tool? What about?
Chiede se conosce qualche utilizzo del gioco anche all'interno delle scuole americane per l'insegnamento della storia.
Yes, I actually have worked with a couple of teachers about trying to implement the game for school use. And at one point in time, I had been approached by someone who was doing curriculum for homeschool kids and was interested in writing kind of a book to go along with Twilight Struggle so that this would be how homeschooled kids learned about the Cold War. When it came to application in a classroom setting in the United States, we re-rigged the game to make players different collective decision-making bodies within the United States and then the Soviet Union, so that there would be multiple Soviet players that represented the Politburo, and then a bifurcated decision-making system in the US where you'd have the Congress and the presidency, and they would be set a little bit against each other. So that's kind of how we tried to get it to work inside that context.
È stato applicato sì nel contesto scolastico americano, ho lavorato con 2 insegnanti su questo progetto con l'idea chiaramente di dividere gruppi di ragazzi, da una parte la Politburo, da una parte il Congresso e la Presidenza americana, quindi anche con lo scopo di evidenziare i processi decisionali, i processi all'interno del sistema politico, non solo su livello solo planetario.
Allora faccio io una domanda, la farò in italiano. Io ho trovato molto interessante, Malik, il momento in cui hai evidenziato come alcuni studenti approfondiscono e vanno a studiare ulteriormente le tematiche proposte durante i momenti di gioco, mentre altri si limitano a vivere l'esperienza senza approfondire di più. E questo avviene anche nelle scuole più tradizionali, dove c'è chi va ad approfondire i temi trattati e chi invece si accontenta di quello che viene detto in classe. La mia domanda è se avete dei dati su una maggiore o minore o uguale tendenza degli studenti ad approfondire i temi rispetto a una scuola di natura tradizionale.
This is a question for you. She's asking whether you have, obviously, as you said, there are students who try to, who are happy to play within the game, and others who go more into depth afterwards and find out more things about the themes that you've addressed. Do you have any data about how much your students do that compared to students in a traditional school? Or anecdotes or information about that?
Yes, it's very hard to have hard evidence about a qualitative thing like this. So what we do have is that when students move on, we find that students with average scores who should find it hard to participate in academic schooling when they go to lycée afterwards, actually perform better than expected, because they have some methods of going into depth with things and so on. It's anecdotal, but it's not one anecdote.
Sure.
It's a series of anecdotes. So in that way, we can find that average students also go into depth from time to time.
Quello che abbiamo notato è che magari gli studenti che vengono considerati meno accademici, quelli o che hanno anche problemi di apprendimento nell'ambito tradizionale, tendono di più, chiaro non ci sono dati statistici, però nella nostra esperienza vediamo che tendono ad essere più portati, avendo acquisito una conoscenza migliore attraverso questo metodo, sono più stimolati anche a fare delle ricerche di approfondire per conto proprio, e quindi anche andando avanti, tornando nel sistema tradizionale, di avere una marcia in più, insomma, quando se si ritrovano poi all'interno del sistema liceale.
Abbiamo altre domande? Qualche timido ancora?
Come vedete potete anche fare domande in italiano, non è l'obbligo l'inglese.
Ne direi nessun altro, quindi ringrazio enormemente i nostri ospiti per i loro interventi e il pubblico per aver